I think the first point I want to make is that if we simply digitize our existing practices, that's one of the worst things we can do in the digital world. I have a son, and he was 8 years old, and he came home from school, and he was super excited because he had a code that his teacher had given him. And the teacher told him that this code would help him do math homework that would help him learn math better. So he brought the code home, and we typed it into the computer, and we opened up the interface, and what we found there was a PDF version of a paper worksheet. And my son was just crestfallen. He was just so disappointed. And I was actually angry because this company had disappointed my son and also taught him that technology isn't interesting. And that's what we have to change. So if you are simply doing online what you did face-to-face, you're not there yet. I want to tell you about some examples where this happened the right way. So this is Shay, and she discovered a new star. Now, Shay is in high school. She lives in West Virginia, which is one of the most rural, mountainous parts of the United States. The economy is depressed there. It's a former coal mining economy. But West Virginia brought fiber to every single school in their state. And as a result, this opportunity was opened up for her. But it wasn't just the broadband that made this possible. They also put her in touch with the scientific community so she could work with real scientists, and they gave her professional tools. So in addition to the wires and the devices, which are necessary, there was a shift in the pedagogy as well. This is Alyssa. She needed a prosthetic hand because she had a birth defect, and she got one for free. The source of this hand were these 3 13-year-old middle school girls. And they, as part of their maker lab at their school, they created a 3D hand for her. So another exciting use of technology. Again, they needed the connectivity, they needed the 3D printer, but they also needed a teacher who made sure that they had a real-world problem to work on and put them in contact with an actual person. And these kids, they stayed in during recess and free time, worked extra to get this done because the technology worked with the pedagogy. This boy had cancer, and he had to live in a hospital that was far away from where his school was. He was so severe that he had to be a resident in the hospital. He had to live in the hospital during his treatment. His classmate had an idea because she didn't want him to miss a year of school. And so her idea was to attend the school as a robot. So they bought a robot, and they had a live video feed of Kyle, the student who was undergoing the treatment, and so he could attend school with his peers. So again, the device, the connectivity, absolutely necessary, or this wouldn't have been possible. But the school also had to accommodate having a robot rolling up and down its halls, and the teachers had to learn to do their lessons in a way that they were accessible to a remote student. So they combined the pedagogy with the technology for the change. So really, if you don't have broadband and you don't have devices, you don't have the needed infrastructure to make the kinds of educational changes that you want to make. But if you just have those, it's not enough. When you combine pedagogical innovation and leadership, then you get school transformation. And we learned this because we worked a lot with innovative teachers. And we have thousands of teachers that we've worked with over the years. And we even created something called the Connected Educators Month, where they could learn more about technology and teaching. But in the end, when we talked to these teachers, they said, my classroom is amazing. The kids can go to the moon. Across the hall, 1932. So until you get to the leadership, you're not going to make the transformation at scale that you really need. You know, some people still ask this question. I don't know if it's being asked in Brazil. I hope not. But should learning powered by technology be optional or required? So I think we need to look at this and look at the word learning and replace it with another word. Should work powered by technology be optional or required? Suddenly, the sentence becomes ludicrous. I never say, you know what, I have the coolest job. I go to work, and sometimes I'm on the computer, and sometimes I'm meeting in a small group, and sometimes I'm in a big meeting with other people. I have a blended work environment, right? I never say that. It's just expected. That's the way we live. That's the way we do what we do. And to make school void of that, to make school the only place that isn't exciting and digital, is a disservice to our kids, both now and in the future. So we're really lucky to have the full support of our president in making this transformation for our nation's schools. He makes the point that we expect Wi-Fi with our coffee. Why not in our schools? I'm the kind of person, if I go to a hotel and they have slow Wi-Fi, I never go back to that hotel, right? I'll go to the next one over. Our kids don't have that choice. They can't just up and leave their school if it doesn't have connectivity. So he set a vision that we would get broadband to every single classroom in our country. The lawyers made him dial it back to 99%. But when you look at his goal, it actually has 4 areas. And a lot of people have heard about the first one, which is getting the broadband there. The second one is affordable interactive devices, because if you have the broadband and not the devices, it doesn't get you very far. The third, though, and if you look at the bottom 2, these are more focused on people. So the first 2 are sort of wires and devices. The second 2 are more about the human capital that we need. So professional development for teachers and leaders, so they know how to use this effectively. And there was a poll, I think it was a Pew poll, where 43% of teachers in the United States said that the main reason they don't use technology is they don't know how. They don't know what they should do. Just because you know how to upload a cat video to Facebook doesn't mean you know how to use technology effectively in your classroom. And then the last is high-quality digital content. And you really need all 4 of these to make a learning transformation. So when we started this effort, we didn't know what the problem was. We hadn't quantified what the connectivity was in our schools. And we sent out people to find out, and they would call up the school and say, how much bandwidth do you have? And they would give them an answer. But that was completely unreliable data. So we worked with a private foundation called the Education Superhighway, and we crowdsourced this. And we sent out a call to all teachers and students and administrators across the country and said, just do a bandwidth test. So they put in their zip code in their school, and they hit the button, and we did an actual live bandwidth test to those schools. And that's how we got a body of data that helped us make the case to policymakers that this was important and it needed to happen. What we found is that only 30% of schools had the broadband that we were shooting for. And we set our goal at 100 megabits per second per 1,000 students. So that was our initial goal, but in 5 years, we'd like to be a gigabit, 1 gigabit per student. Sorry, 1 gigabit per 1,000 students. So that was a really high goal, and only 30% of our schools had it. And the reason we set that goal so high is if you have just a little bit of internet, you can do a few things. You can sort of augment what you're already doing. If you want to transform what you're doing, you need a lot of bandwidth. We've also found that the minute you give a school 100 megabits per second, they start to increase their use dramatically. Because as soon as it's available and it's reliable and they can count on it, they do much more. We had to find a mechanism for getting to those 70% of schools that didn't have broadband. And what we found is that we had a program called the E-rate. So that's the letter E, rate. And the E-rate program was made in the Clinton administration, and its goal was to connect schools to the internet, period, just to get the internet to a school. And it hadn't been updated for 20 years. And so it was still funding things like pagers and phones and things that were not so important to the digital future. So the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, they updated that program. And they did a couple of really important things. One is they prioritized Wi-Fi. So it used to be that connecting to the school was first priority for the money, and the money always ran out at that level. And then connecting to Wi-Fi was a second priority, and the money was never available. So literally for 2 years, no one got Wi-Fi from E-rate. So they changed the priorities around so that this year 10,000 schools asked for Wi-Fi, and every single one of them got it. So by changing that priority, they got the internet all the way to the classroom. And then they increased the annual spending cap. So the cumulative effect is there's now $4.9 billion available per year to get this done. And at this rate, we anticipate that 70,000 schools will reach our bandwidth goals in the next 2 years, which is actually ahead of schedule for the president's goal. This is incredibly remarkable. I don't think there will be a larger change in our school system in the United States than this one. We're going from 30% of schools having broadband to almost every single school having it. It fundamentally changes what is possible for education in our schools. We also brought in the private sector, as was mentioned. We did this for a couple reasons. One, politically, we wanted it to be clear that this wasn't something that President Obama was doing for his personal legacy, but that this was something that was good for everyone. It was good for business, and it's good for schools. And we found that as we approached these companies, they didn't realize what an opportunity there was for them to come into schools and make a difference there. And when we described that opportunity, they readily agreed. So each of these companies made a commitment of either devices or connectivity or software to the schools. And one that I'll just mention in particular, Microsoft agreed to lower the price of their operating system for devices that were going into schools. As a result, all of the manufacturers that produce hardware that use the Microsoft operating system were able to lower their prices. And so it had a huge impact on the cost of devices for schools, and Microsoft's competitors had to follow suit. So as a result of this one company making this commitment, the whole sector readjusted their price point to match. Another thing that we did was we clarified how federal funds could be used. So we have a lot of federal programs. We have programs for poor schools. We have programs for kids with disabilities. We have programs for second language learners. And there was federal funding available for all of those programs. But it wasn't clear that you could use that money for technology. And we found that some at the state level, because we're at the federal level, but at the state level, requests to use those funds to buy technology to help English language learners was being denied. So we simply clarified our policy so that those people who were trying to do that knew that they could. They knew that they could use these funds to buy technology to help a poor school. They could buy technology to help a child with a disability. And that had an impact on the existing funding. We also provided new guidance. So we found that, surprisingly, a superintendent, a leader of a school, he might not know anything about broadband. That's actually not surprising. Of course, he's got a background, or she has a background in educational leadership. They don't know anything about fiber optics. And so we created an infrastructure guide to help them understand from the point of view of a leader, how to get the connectivity they need, policies around device management, best practices and examples to help them understand. We also reached out to the EdTech developers. You're probably aware that more money is being spent, private capital, on EdTech developing, on EdTech companies than ever has been in the history of the planet. Unfortunately, a lot of that money is going to companies who have chosen low-impact ideas. And we wanted to change the focus of those companies to the things that mattered the most. And so we created a guide addressed directly to EdTech developers saying, I know you want to make a difference in education. This is where you're spending your time. This is where you should be spending your time. It's not here, it's here. It also helped them understand how schools buy software, because they were coming from a consumer mindset, and it's a completely different world than that, so they could better navigate. And it also helped them learn techniques to involve educators early on in their development process to make sure when they made something, it was already useful by the time it was done. When we launched this effort, Arnie Duncan, our Secretary of Education, made a really important point, that if this only happens for the rich kids, it's not a revolution. We haven't really changed much. We have to make this work for every single person. So we back that up with a letter from our Office of Civil Rights. And our Office of Civil Rights enforces equality in the treatment of students in our schools. And in this letter, they said that the age of the technology in your school, the speed of the connectivity, and the type of device would all be considered in a civil rights review of whether equal access was being provided in a school district. So if you had a poor school that had slow connectivity and older devices, that would be a violation of the civil rights of those students to an equal access to education. And so this is another policy lever that we were able to use to help schools understand their responsibility in this regard. So we had this vision, we had this idea, we had these guides, but now we needed to get the word out. And the way we did that is we created something called the Future Ready Pledge. And this is a pledge that was taken by superintendents that allowed them to commit publicly that they were going to transform their schools with the power of technology for the entire district, and not just for a school or a classroom. And it outlined principles that they had to commit to follow. This went viral. We had students starting to post on Twitter saying Future Ready is, so it got a lot of pickup there. And it culminated in a digital signing ceremony at the White House with the president. As far as we know, it's the first digital signing ceremony the president's ever done, where we had 100 superintendents from across the country come into the White House and sign the Future Ready Pledge on digital tablets. But more importantly, on that same day, we had almost 2,000 superintendents across the country sign the Future Ready Pledge. So we have 15,000 superintendents. Getting 2,000 of them to do anything at the same time is amazing. And that 2,000 superintendents represents 11.5 million students. And actually, it's up to about 12 and 13 million now. And so how are we meeting our goal? So we had high-level leadership from the president and the secretary of education. So that federal leadership was really important. We took old programs that were out of date and we reworked them and we reallocated the money to higher priorities. And that's a really important thing that we talk about. If you don't, the amount of money that's being spent in schools in the United States is shrinking. The amount of money that needs to be spent on educational technology in schools is growing. So it's a larger piece of a shrinking pie. If you don't stop doing something, you're never going to get there. You can't just add technology onto your budget. And so we, in the E-rate program, stopped funding phones, stopped funding pagers, and all the way down to the district level, these decisions need to be made. What are we going to no longer fund? So this is possible. We brought in the private sector. That's really powerful on a federal level, but also on the local level. A lot of schools have worked with local businesses and said, do you want us to prepare your future workforce for the digital world that you have in your offices? If so, please partner with us and help our school get the things that we need. We provided new guidance. There's so many people who are interested in doing this, but they need a little bit of help. And then we created a brand, the Future Ready brand. And the reason that was important is it captured the imaginations of the people who were doing it. So when the superintendent went to their community, they say, we are a Future Ready school. This is important to us, it's important to you, it's important to the future. And they're able to work together to do that. With that, I'll just say, one of the things that the president says a lot is, there is no other meeting, there is no other team. So when an issue is being discussed that's of grave importance, he wants to make the point that the people in this room are the ones who make the difference. So I'm going to make this point to you. There is no other meeting, there is no other team in Brazil. You are the people who are going to make this difference. The decisions that you make and the actions that you take will make the difference. And I invite you to come along. Thank you.